Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are not just covering the news, we are looking at a tectonic shift. I want you to picture something for a second. It's late December 2025, December 30th to be exact. You are standing on the dock of the port of Mukalla in Yemen.
Right.
It's hot, it's humid, the air smells of salt and diesel fuel. You see a couple of cargo vessels, docking routine stuff, or, so it seems. These ships are coming from Fujairah.
In the United Arab Emirates.
Exactly. It sounds like a standard Tuesday in global shipping.
Completely normal, nothing to see here.
Until the horizon just lights up. And I don't mean a small firework. I mean the distinct, terrifying roar of F-15 fighter jets screaming overhead. And then impact!
Huge explosions, just rocking the entire harbor.
But here's the kicker, and this is the part that should make everyone, stop in their tracks. Those jets weren't American. They weren't Israeli. They weren't some Houthi drone attack.
Yeah.
Those were Royal Saudi Air Force jets, dropping ordnance on vessels linked to their closest, supposedly brotherly ally, the UAE.
It is a moment that I think historians are going to look back on as the end of an era. I mean, for 40 years, whenever we talked about the Gulf, we used this phrase, the twin pillars.
Right, Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
They were the Batman and Robin of the Middle East. They fought wars together in Yemen. They coordinated oil prices. They worked together to suppress the Arab Spring. They were, for all intents and purposes, inseparable.
And in one afternoon, they went from Batman and Robin to, well, something much more adversarial. We are talking about what people are now calling the Great Decoupling.
Decoupling is almost too polite a word for it. What we witnessed in late December and early January of this year was the mask slipping off.
How so?
Well, you're seeing two nations that have spent the last decade accumulating massive amounts of military hardware and economic power, and now they're suddenly turning that influence against each other.
And the stakes couldn't be higher.
Oh, the stakes are everything. We're talking about control over the Red Sea, the future of the global energy market, and really, who gets to be the hegemon of the Arab world in the post-oil era?
So, buckle up. We're going to unpack this entire mess today. We're going to start with the kinetic front. Specifically, this 36-hour war in Yemen that barely made the nightly news in the West, but fundamentally changed the map.
And from there, we have to trace the proxy web, because this isn't just about Yemen. It stretches all the way into the gold mines of Sudan and the strategic ports of Somalia.
And we cannot forget the money. You can't understand the airstrikes without understanding the bank transfers.
Exactly. We have to talk about something called Project HQ, which was this ruthless economic ultimatum Saudi Arabia gave to global corporations. And then there's the knife fight happening right now inside OPEC Plus Day.
Okay, let's start with the spark. That explosion in Mukalla. To really get why Saudi Arabia would bomb a ship linked to the UAE, we have to understand what was happening on the ground in Yemen before December. Because this didn't happen in a vacuum?
No, not at all. The pressure cooker had been hissing for a long time. If you were just reading the headlines from, say, 2019 to 2024, you might have thought the UAE had left Yemen.
Right. They announced that big drawdown. They brought their troops home. I remember seeing pictures of the parades.
That was, to be blunt, a smokescreen.
A smokescreen.
Completely. The UAE didn't leave. They just changed clothes. They outsourced their influence, their entire strategy, to a group on the ground called the Southern Transitional Council, or the STC.
Okay, let's just clarify who the STC is for our listeners. These aren't just random rebels, are they?
No, not at all. Think of them as a government in waiting for a country that doesn't exist yet. Their goal is an independent South Yemen, like it was before 1990.
So they're secessionists.
Absolutely. And they weren't a small militia. They controlled Aden, which is the temporary capital of the whole country. They had tanks, heavy artillery, a real command structure, all bankrolled and trained by Abu Dhabi. They were the UAE's proxy army, plain and simple.
And on the other side of this, you have the internationally recognized government, which is backed by Saudi Arabia.
Right, the Presidential Leadership Council, or PLC. Riyadh sees them as the legitimate government of all of Yemen. And Riyadh wants a unified Yemen.
Why is unity so important for them?
It's about security. For Riyadh, a unified Yemen is an easier-to-manage buffer state against Iran and against chaos in general. They absolutely do not want a fragmented, warring mess on their long southern border. It's a nightmare scenario for them.
So you have Saudi Arabia paying for team unity and the UAE paying for team secession. That feels like a recipe for disaster.
It was a managed disaster for a few years. They sort of kept their proxies from directly fighting each other too much. But then on December 2, 2025, The STC got ambitious.
This is when they launched Operation Promising Future.
Yes, and that name is um, deeply ironic in hindsight. But at the time, it was an incredibly aggressive move. This wasn't a minor border skirmish. This was a lightning offensive designed to change the facts on the ground.
So where did they go? What was the objective?
STC forces surged out of their strongholds in the southwest and pushed hard to the east into two specific governorates, Hadramaut and Al-Mara.
Okay, geography check. Why should we care about Hadramaut and Al-Mara? Are these just empty deserts?
Far from it. Hadramaut is the prize. It contains about 80% of Yemen's known oil reserves.
80%. So if you control Hadramaut, you control Yemen's wallet.
You control the entire economic future of the country. And Al-Mara, for the Saudis, that's even more critical. Al-Mara is the easternmost province. It borders Oman, but more importantly, it shares a very long, very porous border with Saudi Arabia itself.
And Clout, if the STC, the UAE's proxy, takes Al-Mara,
Then suddenly, from Riyadh's perspective, you have an Emirati client state sitting right on your doorstep. It controls your southern flank and potentially gives the UAE an unchecked land route to the Indian Ocean.
it's an encirclement play.
Riyadh viewed it as an existential threat. They saw it as the UAE trying to hem them in to build a sphere of influence that surrounded the kingdom.
Okay, so the STC rolls in. They take the oil fields and take the border regions. Saudi Arabia must have been furious.
Furious doesn't even begin to cover it. They issued public warnings. They sent private diplomatic cables. They demanded an immediate withdrawal. They even started mobilizing their own forces on the border as a show of force.
And the STC.
The STC, feeling very confident, probably because they had promises of support from Abu Dhabi, refused to budge. They dug in. They thought the Saudis were bluffing.
Which brings us back to that moment on the dock, December 30th.
Right. Saudi intelligence was watching everything. Their satellites, their agents on the ground. They identified these two commercial vessels coming from Fujairah. The manifest probably said something innocent like humanitarian aid or construction materials.
But it was.
Saudi intelligence was convinced, and later released imagery to back it up, that these ships were offloading heavy armored vehicles, anti-tank guided missiles, and advanced communications gear directly to the STC fighters in Mukalla.
So Riyadh decided, we are not sending another diplomatic cable this time.
They decided to send a message that could not be misinterpreted. The airstrike was precise, but it was incredibly loud, politically speaking. By hitting those ships, Saudi Arabia broke the one unwritten rule of the Gulf Cooperation Council. You don't shoot at each other. Ever.
That is a massive escalation. I mean, you have to try and find a parallel. Imagine if the U.S. bombed a British ship delivering supplies to a conflict zone. It's almost unthinkable among allies.
It shows you the level of desperation and anger in Riyadh. And the follow-up was just as swift. The Saudi-backed Yemeni government immediately declared a state of emergency.
And they kicked the UAE out.
An ultimatum. They ordered all UAE forces, and that means any advisors, any logistics officers, anyone with a UAE passport out of the country within 24 hours. They closed the airspace, they closed the ports, they effectively put the STC in a quarantine.
How did the UAE react? Did they scramble their own jets? I mean, did we almost have a hot war between Saudi Arabia and the UAE right there in the skies over Yemen?
That was the fear for about 6, maybe 12 hours. The world was holding its breath. But the UAE blinked.
They backed down.
They did. Publicly, they denied the ships were carrying weapons, of course. But they announced a voluntary withdrawal of their remaining personnel to de-escalate tensions. They realized that Saudi Arabia was willing to go to a level of direct kinetic violence that they were not prepared to match openly.
But the fighting on the ground didn't stop, did it? The STC was still there.
No, that's when the real war started. And this is the part that hasn't been covered nearly enough in the West. This is what's being called the 36-hour war.
36 hours. That's incredibly fast for any military campaign, let alone in the rugged terrain of Yemen. How did the Saudi-backed forces pull that off?
Because these weren't just the regular Saudi-backed forces of the old Yemeni army. We need to talk about a new group called the Nation Shield Forces.
The Nation Shield Forces. Who are they?
For the last 3 years, while everyone was focused on the Houthi front in the north, Saudi Arabia was quietly building a new army from scratch in the south. They completely bypassed the old corrupt official army channels and the unreliable tribal leaders.
So who did they recruit?
They recruited heavily from Salafist groups. These are fighters who were highly ideological, fiercely anti-communist from the old days, and most importantly, anti-separatist. Their loyalty wasn't to a tribe or a general, it was directly to the Saudi checkbook.
So they built a Praetorian Guard, an army loyal only to them.
That's the perfect way to describe it. And they equip them with the good stuff, not leftover Soviet-era junk. We're talking thousands of American-made Oshkosh M-ATVs. Those are the big, mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles.
What do you see in Afghanistan?
Exactly. They gave them thermal optics for night fighting, modern drone jammers, and, crucially, coordinated air support from the Royal Saudi Air Force. So when this counteroffensive launched in early January 2026, the STC wasn't fighting a ragtag militia. They were fighting a modern NATO-standard mechanized force.
And the STC just collapsed after all that buildup.
Like House of Cards. It was a shock. The nation's shield forces retook the oil fields in Hadramaut in a matter of hours. They just swept through Al-Mara, securing the Saudi border. And they did something no one expected. They just kept going. They marched on Aden,
The STC capital, the heart of their project.
but January 7th, government forces were on the outskirts, entering the city. The STC leadership realized the game was up. Their patron, the UAE, had stepped back. They had no air cover. Their supply lines were cut.
So what happened to their leader, Idris al-Zubadi?
He fled the country. He apparently took a boat across the Gulf of Aden to Somaliland, and then a private jet from there to Abu Dhabi. A few days later, on January 9th, the STC's political wing announced it was dissolving itself and would be integrated into the legitimate government.
Wow, so that is a total unambiguous victory for Saudi Arabia in Yemen.
Militarily, yes.
Yeah.
An absolute rout.
Right.
They wiped the board clean of the UAE's primary proxy. They proved that on the Arabian Peninsula, they are still the heavyweight champion. But, and this is the big but, you cannot bomb your way back into a healthy relationship. The trust between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi is gone. It's dead.
It feels like this split, then, it has to go way deeper than just a border dispute in Yemen. You mentioned earlier a philosophical divide. It sounds like these two countries are operating on completely different operating systems now.
That's a great way to put it. They have fundamentally different visions for what the Middle East should look like in the 21st century. We can call it the status quo power versus the break-to-build power.
Okay, break that down for us. Let's start with Saudi Arabia's philosophy.
Saudi Arabia is the ultimate status quo power. They are obsessed with state sovereignty and strong central governments. They want a unified Yemen, a unified Sudan, a unified Somalia.
Why? What's the thinking there?
Because they view the entire region through the lens of security. They believe that if you have strong central governments, you can control borders, you can stop the flow of terrorists and weapons, and you can create a bulwark against Iranian influence. They want stability, a predictable map, so they can focus on their massive domestic project, Vision 2030.
Keep things the same, just with more money and skyscrapers.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Don't rock the boat.
And the UAE.
The UAE has adopted a much more nimble and disruptive strategy. It's very break to build. They looked at the map and came to the conclusion that these massive post-colonial Arab states like Yemen, like Sudan, are fundamentally dysfunctional. They're too big and too divided to govern effectively.
Well, instead of trying to fix the whole country.
They focus on what they call nodes,
No.
coastal logistical hubs, ports. At its heart, the UAE is a maritime commercial empire. DP World runs ports all over the globe. They want to control the flow of goods. And it is much, much easier to dominate a port in a small breakaway region like Aden in South Yemen or Berbera in Somaliland than it is to deal with a messy, bureaucratic central government in a capital city hundreds of miles inland.
So they actually prefer fragmentation. A chaotic map is good for business.
They thrive in it. Fragmented states are weak states. They need powerful patrons. If you're the patron, you get a 99-year lease on the port, you control the trade, and you don't have to worry about fixing the schools or the power grid in the interior. It's a very cynical strategy, but from a purely commercial standpoint, it's brilliant.
But that strategy puts them on a direct collision course with Saudi Arabia in every single conflict zone in the region.
Every single one.
Let's look at Sudan. We've talked a lot about Yemen, but Sudan is a human tragedy that's been unfolding for years now. How does this rivalry play out there?
Sudan is the Yemen proxy war turned up to 11. It's even more direct. On one side, you have the Sudanese armed forces, the SAF, that's the regular army, and they are backed by Saudi Arabia and, importantly, by Egypt. They represent the state.
The status quo.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. This is a massive paramilitary group that grew out of the Janjaweed militias. And they are, by all accounts, the UAE's horse in this race.
Why on earth would the UAE back a paramilitary group that's accused of such terrible atrocities? I mean, what's the strategic goal? Is it just about influence?
It's about gold. To understand this, you have to follow the money. The RSF controls most of the artisanal gold mines in Darfur and the western regions of Sudan.
This is the gold for arms trade I've heard about. How does that actually work? Is it literally people trading gold bars for boxes of bullets?
It is surprisingly literal,
Yeah.
and the logistics are fascinatingly complex. Let's just trace a shipment. A crate of ammunition or maybe some advanced anti-aircraft missiles might start its journey in Serbia or another Eastern European country. It gets purchased through a shell company and flown on a cargo plane to the UAE. Then it gets loaded onto other, less traceable cargo planes. But they don't fly straight to Sudan. That's too obvious.
So where do they go?
They fly to eastern Libya, to air bases controlled by Khalifa Haftar, who is another major UAE ally in the region.
So they use a warlord in Libya as a middleman, a cutout.
Precisely. From Libya, the weapons are loaded onto truck convoys. They drive south through the Sahara Desert into northern Chad and then across the porous, unpatrolled border into Darfur, directly into the hands of the RSF. It's an elaborate supply chain that completely bypasses the Sudanese government and any international sanctions.
And what goes back the other way on those trucks?
Raw, unrefined gold, mined in conflict zones, often using child labor, loaded onto those same trucks and planes, flown to Dubai where it's refined in the city's famous gold souks, and then sold on the global market, clean as a whistle. The proceeds from that gold pay for the next shipment of weapons. It's a self-sustaining war machine.
And Saudi Arabia decided to try and choke the supply line off.
They did. In late 2025, we saw a major coordinated move by Riyadh and Cairo. Saudi Arabia officially closed its airspace to any UAE-flagged cargo flights that listed Libya as their destination.
Wow. Closing your airspace to a supposed ally, that's a huge move.
It's a quasi-blockade. It forced the UAE to fly much longer, more expensive routes around the Arabian Peninsula. It didn't stop the flow completely, but it disrupted it. And that disruption, combined with Saudi support for the other side, really changed the tide of the war.
What kind of support did the Saudis give the army?
This is interesting. The Saudis didn't send their own weapons. They acted as a broker. They financed deals for the Sudanese army to acquire Turkish Bayraktar drones and, reportedly, some older Pakistani fighter jets.
So they're building a rival coalition.
Yes. And with that newfound air superiority, the Sudanese army has been able to push the RSF out of Khartoum and reclaim most of the central agricultural belt of the country. The RSF is being isolated back in its desert strongholds.
So once again, on the military front, it looks like Saudi Arabia is winning the argument.
They're winning the battlefield, yes. But the UAE is playing a longer game, creating these structural facts on the ground that are harder to reverse. And to see that, you have to look just across the water to the Horn of Africa.
Right. This is part of the encirclement theory we talked about. So what's happening in Somalia?
Well, the key piece of the puzzle isn't Somalia itself, but Somaliland.
That's the breakaway region in the north.
Exactly. Somaliland declared independence 30 years ago. Technically, no UN member state recognizes them, except, for all practical purposes, the UAE does. The UAE, through DP World, runs their main port at Berbera. They've invested hundreds of millions there. They treat it like a sovereign state.
And Saudi Arabia, true to form, supports the central government in Mogadishu, the One Somalia policy.
Correct. Status quo versus break to build all over again. But here is the bombshell that dropped in late December of 2025, right around the time of the Mukalla airstrike. Israel officially recognized Somaliland's independence.
Wait, Israel? What do they have to do with this?
You have to see this as a coordinated move. The UAE and Israel are working in lockstep since the Abraham Accords. Israel wants a strategic friend on the Red Sea, right across from Yemen. The UAE wants their port investment to be legitimized. By recognizing Somaliland, they are trying to force the issue and create a new pro-UAE, pro-Israel state on this critical waterway.
And how did Riyadh take that news?
They went ballistic. They condemned it immediately and fiercely. They see this as a UAE-Israel axis building a chain of influence from the Persian Gulf through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and up into the Horn of Africa.
The encirclement.
From their palace in Riyadh, they look south, they see a UAE-backed statelet. They look west to Sudan, they see a UAE-backed militia. They look across the Red Sea, they see a UAE port and an Israeli embassy in Somaliland. It's not paranoia if it's real. They feel like they are being strategically surrounded by this new alliance.
And you mentioned Ethiopia in the outline. How do they fit into this?
Ethiopia is another piece. There are reports of a massive UAE-funded presidential palace being built in Addis Ababa. Critics are saying Ethiopia is slowly becoming a client state of Abu Dhabi, giving the UAE influence deep in the African continent, right at the source of the Nile.
We've talked a lot about tanks and drones and ports, but wars are expensive. You need cash to pay for the mercenaries and the missiles. And it seems like the rivalry isn't just about territory anymore. It's about who controls the economy of the future.
The military split is just the symptom. The disease, the root cause, is economic. Both of these monarchies know the same terrifying truth. The oil age is ending. It might not be next year, but it's coming. They have maybe a 10, 20, 30-year window to completely reinvent their economies, or they will collapse.
And they both decided to do the exact same thing. They both want to be the region's hub.
Right. They are in a head-to-head race to be the global hub for tourism, for logistics, for finance, for technology, for artificial intelligence. It's a zero-sum game. There is only so much foreign capital, so much international talent, and so many tourists to go around. One's gain is the other's loss.
But the UAE has a massive head start in this race. I mean, Dubai is Dubai. It's a global brand. Abu Dhabi is a massive financial power.
Years ahead. UAE's non-oil GDP is nearly 77% of their total economy.
Yeah.
They've already done the hard work. They have the airports, the ports, the hotels, the rule of law, the lifestyle that attracts expats.
And Saudi Arabia is playing catch-up.
Desperately. Their non-oil GDP is sitting at about 56%. They're pouring trillions into building these giga projects, NEOM, the Red Sea project, Qiddiya, literally out of the sand. They're trying to build in 10 years what Dubai built in 30.
So how does Saudi catch up? They can't just wait for organic growth to attract businesses.
They decided not to wait. They used a sledgehammer. And it's called Project HQ.
I remember reading about this. The ultimatum.
This is the economic equivalent of the airstrike in Mokala. It was a declaration of war. In 2021, Saudi Arabia announced a new policy. If you are a multinational corporation and you want a single dollar of Saudi government contracts, which is the biggest economy in the region by far, you must move your regional headquarters to Riyadh by the start of 2024.
And they meant the real HQ, right? Not just a postbox or a WeWork office with 2 interns.
Oh, they were very clear. They demanded the C-suite, the decision makers, the people with real budgets. You imagine you are the regional vice president for, say, Apple or Goldman Sachs. You've lived in Dubai for 10 years. Your kids go to the best British schools. You have a villa on the Palm. You spend your weekends at beach clubs.
It's a comfortable life.
Very. And suddenly, Mohammed bin Salman puts a metaphorical gun to your company's head and says, move your entire life to Riyadh, or your company's cut off from our market.
That is a brutal choice. I mean, Riyadh is changing fast, but it's not Dubai. It doesn't have the same social freedoms, the access to alcohol, the whole lifestyle package.
It's a massive construction site compared to a finished luxury resort. But money talks louder than lifestyle. And Saudi offered a huge carrot to go with the stick.
What was the carrot?
A 30-year tax holiday. No corporate tax for 3 decades. And critically, an exemption from their strict Saudization hiring quotas, which forces companies to hire a certain percentage of Saudi nationals.
So it's a free pass, basically. Tax-free, and you can hire who you want.
Exactly. It was an offer that was too good to refuse.
So did it work? Or did companies call their bluff?
It worked spectacularly well.
Yeah.
By mid-2025, reports indicated that over 700 massive multinational corporations had moved their regional HQs to Riyadh. We're talking Apple, Google, Boston Consulting Group, Goldman Sachs.
The big names.
And that must have just ripped the heart out of Dubai's business model.
It bled them. One report I saw said the UAE saw a 31% drop in new foreign HQ projects in 2024 alone. Commercial real estate in Riyadh's new financial district is booming. In Dubai, for the first time in years, vacancies in the prime office sector started ticking up. Riyadh is actively cannibalizing Dubai's success. This feels incredibly aggressive for 2 countries that are supposed to be allies.
It is. It's predatory capitalism on a national scale. And this friction, it spills over into the one area you'd think they would agree on. Oil.
Right. They both need that oil revenue to pay for all this. So why are they fighting inside OPEC plus Allah?
Because they have a fundamental conflict of interest based on their national budgets. Saudi Arabia, to pay for NEO and all these giga projects, needs a very high oil price. Their fiscal break-even is estimated to be around $90 a barrel.
So they need prices high.
Desperately. So Saudi Arabia is always the one pushing for production cuts within OPEC plus halal. Less supply on the market means higher prices.
And the UAE.
The UAE is in a completely different position. They spent billions over the last 5 years investing in technology to expand their capacity to pump oil. Their breaking price is much, much lower, somewhere around $50 or $60 a barrel.
So they don't want to cut production.
They want to do the opposite. They want to pump more. They've got this massive new capacity, and they want to sell as much volume as they can while there is still global demand. They feel like Saudi Arabia is forcing them to keep their most valuable asset in the ground just to subsidize Saudi's expensive building projects.
I've read rumors that the UAE is just ignoring the quotas they agree to.
They are cheating, to use the OPEC parlance. It's an open secret. Most industry reports suggest they are consistently exporting about 3.3 million barrels a day, while their official OPEC plus quota is only 2.9 million.
That's 400,000 extra barrels of oil flooding the market every single day.
Which puts downward pressure on the price, which directly hurts the Saudi budget. It's an economic war of attrition.
And I read there's a deadline coming up.
There is a ticking time bomb. In 2026, this year, there's a new independent audit of every member's maximum sustainable capacity due to be completed. If that audit confirms that the UAE can indeed pump way more oil than their current baseline allows, they're going to demand a much higher quota.
And if Saudi says no?
The UAE has openly threatened to leave OPEC entirely.
If the UAE leaves OPEC, does the whole cartel collapse?
It loses its teeth.
Yeah.
It would trigger an immediate price war. Saudi would open the taps. The UAE would open the taps. We could see oil drop to $40 a barrel, maybe even lower. That would devastate the Saudi budget and throw all of Vision 2030 into question. It's a very high-stakes game of chicken.
It's just amazing. We are watching the real-time dismantling of the entire institutional architecture of the Gulf. The GCC is effectively broken, OPEC is cracking, and as they drift apart, they are frantically looking for new friends, new alliances.
Right.
We touched on Israel, but I want to go deeper on these geopolitical realignments.
The Abraham Accords in 2020 were really the beginning of the end for the old Saudi-UAE alignment.
Right.
When the UAE normalized relations with Israel, they broke the long-standing Arab consensus that normalization could only happen after a Palestinian state was created.
And the economic and security relationship between the UAE and Israel is booming.
Billions of dollars in trade, technology transfer, especially in cybersecurity and surveillance, joint military drills. For all intents and purposes, the UAE and Israel are becoming a cohesive strategic bloc in the region.
And Saudi Arabia is still on the outside of that, looking in.
Saudi Arabia has held firm. They refuse to normalize without a meaningful path to a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
And honestly, after the renewed conflict and carnage in Gaza over the last few years, Riyadh feels completely vindicated.
How so?
They're using their position to reclaim leadership of the Arab world. They are positioning themselves as the defender of the Arab consensus, the moral leader. And in doing so, they are isolating the UAE, painting them as the sellout in the eyes of the Arab street. It's a powerful narrative.
So Saudi is reclaiming the moral high ground, but they still need security partners. If they can't rely on the U.S. as much as they used to, and they clearly don't trust the UAE, where do they turn?
They're pivoting. They're building a new axis of the other big traditional Sunni powers: Turkey, Egypt, and most importantly, Pakistan.
I saw a headline about a major deal with Pakistan back in September 2025. It was called a Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement. It sounded fairly standard, but you're telling me there is more to it than that.
Much more. Buried in the details, or at least in the analysis of the deal, is what some are calling the nuclear ambiguity clause.
Whoa, start there for a second. Nuclear ambiguity. Are we saying Saudi Arabia is basically renting a nuclear weapon?
That's the implication. Look, Saudi Arabia knows it cannot catch up to Iran's advanced nuclear program overnight, and it can't match the high-tech integrated weaponry the UAE is now getting from Israel and the U.S. overnight either. So what's the ultimate insurance policy?
The bomb.
Pakistan is the only Muslim-majority nation with a proven nuclear arsenal. This new deal suggests that in exchange for massive ongoing Saudi financial investment, we're talking central bank deposits, new oil refineries, basically bailing out the perennially struggling Pakistani economy, Pakistan provides an ultimate security guarantee.
What does that guarantee mean in practice?
It's deliberately vague, but it could mean anything from stationing Pakistani nuclear-capable missiles on Saudi soil during a crisis to just the explicit ironclad promise of nuclear retaliation if the kingdom faces an existential threat.
It's a counterbalance to the UAE-Israel axis.
Precisely. Riyadh is saying, you have Israeli tech and American fighter jets. Fine. We have Pakistani nukes in our back pocket.
That is a terrifyingly high-stakes development. We're talking about nuclear proliferation by proxy.
It just shows you how threatened the House of Saud feels. Their threat perception has shifted. They aren't just worried about Iran anymore. They're actively building a deterrent against their neighbors.
And where do the global superpowers fit into this new chessboard? China? Russia? The U.S.?
They're all trying to play both sides, of course. But you can see a divergence in how Riyadh and Abu Dhabi are positioning themselves globally. The UAE is trying to become Singapore, a neutral, global logistics and finance hub. They want to trade with everyone: China, Russia, Iran, the U.S., Israel. They don't want to get involved in the great power fights. They just want to be the indispensable hub that moves the boxes and the money for everybody.
In Saudi Arabia?
Saudi wants to be Germany or South Korea. They want to be a real industrial and manufacturing power. They want to build electric cars with Lucid. They want to build ships. They want to process minerals and become a key part of global supply chains. They're taking a much more active, nationalist, and perhaps less neutral approach to their economic future.
So let's zoom out. We've covered a lot of ground here. The airstrikes in Yemen, the gold smuggling in Sudan, the corporate hostage-taking with Project HQ, the shadow nuclear deals. What is the new normal for the Middle East?
The new normal is structural rivalry. This isn't a temporary lovers' quarrel. This is not a spat between two princes that will be solved with a hug at an airport summit. These are two powerful states with fundamentally different and competing survival strategies for the post-oil world.
So who is winning right now, if we had to keep score in early 2026?
Militarily, Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
hands down. They won the round in Yemen decisively. The STC is gone. They seem to have successfully choked off the UAE's main proxy in Sudan. They proved that when push comes to shove on the battlefield, they are the big dog.
And economically?
It's much, much murkier. Saudi is using brute force to move companies, yes. But does coercion build a truly thriving, innovative ecosystem? The UAE still has the deep reservoir of international talent, the lifestyle, the legal framework, the simple ease of doing business.
The vibe?
The vibe, exactly. People want to live and work in Dubai. For now, they have to live and work in Riyadh for market access. That's a very dangerous and fragile foundation to build a new economy on.
What scares you the most about this rivalry? Is it the risk of a full-scale hot war between them?
A direct full-scale war is still unlikely. They're too integrated with the global economy. What scares me more is what I'd call the zombie GCC.
The zombie GCC, explain that.
Imagine a Middle East where every single positive, forward-looking regional project is paralyzed by this rivalry. You want to build a railway connecting the Gulf states. Saudi blocks it because the main hub would be Dubai's Jebel Ali port. You want to create a fund to rebuild Yemen. The UAE blocks it because the contracts would go to Saudi firms. We risk seeing a decade of stagnation and decay because the two main engines of the region are pulling in opposite directions.
An influence auction where nothing actually gets sold or built.
Precisely. And in the meantime, the Red Sea, which is the absolute jugular vein of the global economy, remains incredibly fragile, with Saudi and UAE proxies undermining each other in Yemen, Sudan, and Somalia, who's providing security for the shipping lanes. It creates a vacuum for pirates, for terrorists, for all kinds of chaos.
It really is a tragedy when you think about it. We spent the better part of 40 years, the entire foreign policy establishment, worrying about Iran destabilizing the Gulf.
That was the entire narrative. The Iranian boogeyman was the justification for everything.
And now it turns out the biggest threat to the region's coherence isn't the enemy outside the gate. It's the bitter existential rivalry between its two biggest success stories.
And you have to ask yourself, if Saudi Arabia is willing to bomb a UAE-linked ship in Mukalla today, what happens next time? What happens when the oil price drops to $40 and the budgets are really squeezed? What happens when the pressure gets really, truly high?
And that is the question we have to leave you with today. Do you think the business interests, the sheer amount of money on the table for both sides, will eventually force a truce? Will the CEOs and the bankers force the politicians to shake hands and compromise? Or will this raw quest for regional dominance drive them further and further apart, turning the Gulf into a Cold War zone for the next generation?
It's the multi-trillion-dollar question, and right now, no one has the answer.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. This is a story that is just beginning, and you can be sure we'll be watching every move.
Until next time.
Thank you.